Thanks so much for coming, everyone. I'm very, very excited about this. We've had, I think, 40 plus year-to-date events in Europe for the Zulu community alone. We did not actually, we were planning not to have another one like of this scale before Christmas, but as it happens, you got to pick the opportunity when it's there. Blockchain, cryptocurrency, all of this is obviously a very, very hot topic right now. And I think also the reason for you being here is that you want to hear more about it. And obviously some of you know more than others. So hopefully we can do a little bit of knowledge sharing. And I'm very, very excited with the panel that's been put up here by some of the volunteers in the Zulu community. And I'm particularly excited to have ConsenSys here as well as one of the leaders in this field, wanting to sponsor and support. Hopefully, you know, there will be some good conversations coming out of the event tonight. But really, I'm not an expert on this topic. I'm here to learn as you. So I'll just do a very quick introduction of the Zulu stuff that we do. There's a good mix of people here tonight, and some of you are familiar with what we do, and some of you are hopefully new to the activities here. Yeah, so let me just see here. We have a very, very good panel of speakers. I'm not going to go too much into detail now because everyone will introduce themselves. I'm not going to make them any favor if I'm going to talk on their behalf. But I think we have an agenda here, which is running a little late. Well, we'll do a background, why we set this up, and also the audience. Then we have Stanislas for Mosaic Ventures as a data scientist, very strong in this space, doing an introduction. Yeah, you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, but at least we brought you in as an expert. So I'm sure it's going to be amazing. Pressure on you. No, we don't want to make this too formal, right? Like obviously questions, Q&As, all that will be there, and we will have a networking session in the end. We obviously have a panel as well, and we also have ConsenSys talking about what they do. So yes, I was asked, so I didn't put up the agenda, by the way. I was asked to speak a little bit of myself and my background. I work with a number of products at Google on the commercial side of things. So it's been very exciting, biz dev, partnership sales across some of the largest products we have, mainly trying to bring them into enterprises. But that's my day job. My night job is working with startups, and entrepreneurs and founders and so forth, there are quite a few of here today. I was one myself. I actually did a concert guide back in 2006 in Denmark. We never made any money, but it was a hell of an experience. And I actually sat in the same incubator as the founding team of Trustpilot did. And clearly, some of us made it, and it wasn't me. I'm also one of the Google mentors at the Campus London. We have plenty of mentors there. But I just want to say it's amazing how sort of the whole community is growing and in Europe in general, and obviously with, I think, London, Brexit or not, is continuing to sort of take the lead on that. We have many players that we work with in the Zulu community there as well, so we'll try to give you a few examples of that as we go. But I just want to set the scene a little bit, because I don't think everyone here knows about what the Zulu community really is, right? And really at its core, it's about trying to help entrepreneurs realize their ideas and build successful startups. There were a couple of ex-Googlers who left Google a couple of years ago, and they realized even if you had Google on your resume, it was bloody hard to build a successful startup, right? So like, why don't we help each other? And that's actually where the community sort of started and where it is still today. And it's grown to more than 3,000 members globally. And we actually have a lot of activity here in Europe. More or less than a year ago, I had I took the initiative to do the first event, and I had 3 people show up. I thought it was a disaster. And Chris, who is the founder of Zulu.co, he was like, send me some photos, because you're always asking for photos so we could share with the community what we do. And I was like, dude, there's a photo of me and 2 other people. I was the 3rd one who was showing up, right? So I was like, obviously no photos shared, right? Like, but I have to tell you that it's absolutely amazing to be here today and just have so much support from the startup community in general. But also obviously from the ex-Googlers who want to help. And obviously Danilo is one who's been pulling this event off. Yes, I just want to give you some numbers here. In the beginning of the year, we were probably around 400 members in Europe. Now we have more than 1,000 members actually signed up. There are plenty of more ex-Googlers. I was saying, in general, there is a bias of entrepreneurship in most of the Googlers or ex-Googlers, right? Which is also why I think people find this community very, very interesting. We have active champions across Europe. Actually, we have more than 20 across the world. So we have actually a global reach, and we're sort of local at the same time. What I would say, and yes, this is being recorded, so I'm not sure if I should say this, but I'm going to do this anyway. If I was Larry and Sergey and I knew that 10% of the people who leave the company are actually going out and starting their own businesses, I would be really, really proud, right? So of the community in Europe, we have more than 10% of the people are actually founders, right? Whether it's freelancers, whether it's consultants, whether it's people who are trying to go big, I think you just gotta support these people on their journeys, right? And that's what we're here to do. So, just gonna see, I did a little bit of slideshow, pictures here earlier. But at its core, we a network. I would say the topics that you discuss, apart from personal problems, typically the things that come up is around funding and talent, and that's actually regardless of whether you're just about to leave Google, whether you left Google and looking for a co-founder, or it's Series B, Series E. Right now, we're more focused on the earlier stage, but funding is obviously a problem. But the even bigger problem is actually finding the right people for your team, and that's also why the community is such a great thing for startups, because we have those people and skills in the community, whether it's UX, engineering, business, et cetera, right? We have the ability to pull in people from basically everywhere in the world. So, for example, when we did the pitch day in London in June, we had the former COO, Kasar Jonas, former COO of YC, was giving all the people who were going to pitch in the day feedback on the pitches and so forth. He's an ex-Googler as well, so we have the ability to pull from these sort of skills across the community to help each other. And the great thing is, it's all sort of done on a voluntary basis. And I think you can see people, we're having fun, we're actually being very serious, but some of the best sessions is actually when you just go and meet over a cup of tea, over a cup of coffee, maybe over a beer, I have looking into 2018, just a couple of things. Obviously, if you're not signed up already as an ex-Googler or Googler, you can sign up on Google.co, join a very active community on Slack. Also, if you're not a Googler or Googler, right, we want to work with you anyways. So there's also a possibility to sign up to the community, and we'll talk about the things that we do with you guys across the community. Next year, we're trying to look more to grow the European angel community. So we will follow up on this. If there's anyone who want to reach out to us and talk about that in general, please do so. And then for everyone here, please participate and have fun. And then if you're looking to raise funding in the next 6 months, consider to apply for the pitch day. We had the 13 startups that pitched in June. 5 of them have received funding today. And one is going to YC in January, right? So there's a lot of traction and things going in our way. I think apart from that, I have a blank slide. I just want to say, because this is the last big activity we have this year, I just want to say congratulations. Obviously also thanks, but actually congratulations to everyone in the community here in Europe who has been helping out, from people in Madrid, Berlin, Amsterdam, Dublin, Copenhagen, Tel Aviv, and also obviously here in London. And I was actually trying to put all your names in the slide deck, but unfortunately there are too many of you. So I hope we will have a chance to celebrate properly, but also thanks to the wider community here and also to ConsenSys and the people attending tonight. And with that, I'll leave it to the next speaker.
You? Okay.
Sorry about that.
Apologies. Is this working? Perfect. Okay, so let me just start by saying how excited I am to be here and to see quite a few familiar faces as well as some new faces, and some of them hopefully, I will see more often. So, we have a really wide range of people here in this room, and it's been really hard to reach out to some of you, really easy to reach out to some others. But in the end, we're all here because we're really interested in blockchain technology, right? And it's just something that we've seen in this building people talk about all the time. And so I thought, why not just gather in a room, bring some smart people in here, and just talk about this, because it's a really interesting, challenging, but very exciting topic. So some background on me and why I actually am in this field and why I was interested to do this with you guys was because I got into blockchain quite early on. So it was back in 2011, I heard about Bitcoin. A friend was buying some Peruvian tea online, and he told me, you can buy it with this thing. It's like a coin, but it's not made of gold, but it's called Bitcoin. And I'm like, okay, interesting. I wasn't interested nor in the tea, nor in the Bitcoin. So I kind of ignored that. But then about 2 months later, I saw a tweet by someone I really like, called Fred Wilson, who's the partner at Union Square Ventures in New York, a really famous venture capital firm. And he said blockchain was going to be the next big thing. So I was like, okay, maybe I better pay attention. And so I did some research, and I was in Switzerland at the time, where I'm from, and I'm a ski teacher. So I was ski teaching for 2 weeks, and then all the money that I earned ski teaching, I was like, I'm just going to buy a bunch of Bitcoins. So I did that, and I was a proud owner of 68 Bitcoins back then. As you can imagine, I probably I don't own them anymore, unfortunately. But you can blame my dad for that, okay? So not me. So so I just want to give you a picture of how the industry looked back then, right? So you had these exchanges. I had all my Bitcoins on MTGOX. Who's heard of MTGOX before? A few of you, yeah, definitely. So, you used to refresh the page, and you have Bitcoins, and then you'd refresh, and the Bitcoins would be gone. I mean, it was a catastrophe, right? But long story short, I knew it was interesting. I wanted to get excited about it. But yeah, MTGOX ended up closing down. I lost a bunch of Bitcoins. I also decided to do something else. I ended up in Berlin building a startup in the influencer marketing thing. Unfortunately, I built it before influencer marketing was a thing, or there was a title about it. But I spent 3 years off blockchain. And then due to someone actually in this room, I actually got back into this game, with Ethereum, which is probably what you have recognized here on my chest, which is, another type of really interesting, I would call it a universe to look at, right? Because it's just something that has brought blockchain technology to a whole new level, and also in terms of awareness, it has really helped the ecosystem. So that's one of the main reasons I've been wanting to chat to you about this technology and wanting to get a bunch of people in here. Now, blockchain technology is super interesting, but it's hard to understand, and we'll get people. I just realized I forgot my clicker. I think Rune still has it. Where's Rune? Awesome. I feel so privileged. We have an awesome guy helping us out here. Shout out to the whole team, actually, because thank you so much for your help. Awesome. So I usually do the events not in this building. I've always wanted to do an event here, and it's just amazing to see the facility. So to go next, like one thing I usually do all the time is try to get to know the audience I'm speaking to, right? I guess a crypto audience is very different than, for example, a YouTube audience, but I still thought it would be nice to see who's in the room. So as you know, this event is targeted for Xooglers and then for Googlers. We have about 50% Xooglers in here, while the other 50% are from the Google community, the venture capital community, or we have some blockchain experts, right? Now, I would like to ask you if you could please put your hands up if you're a Xoogler. Could you please raise your hand up very high? Okay, awesome, cool. How many of you guys, Xooglers, are founders? Can you keep your hands up? Okay, so we have about 10 of them. Awesome, very cool. Who misses Google? No one. Oh, one guy misses Google. Okay, good. Oh, I forgot this is getting recorded. Okay. All right. Well, how many are Googlers? Can you put your hands up? Okay, a bunch of you. Awesome. I promoted the hell out of this event in the building, so you must have seen all the flyers around. Thanks to Jasmine also for the big help. But yeah, the rest of the people are VCs. Who is a VC here or an angel? Can you put your hands up higher so everybody can see? Okay, there. So again, 10 people or so. And yeah, a bunch of founders as well. and of course crypto enthusiasts, which I hope everyone here is. And yeah, so thinking of you as crypto enthusiasts, I had another question, which was, who's actually here owns at least one cryptocurrency? Can you please show me your hands up? Okay, so almost everyone. Okay, wow. What about, who owns a Bitcoin or a piece of a Bitcoin? Put your hands up, please. A lot of people. Okay, now it's going to get interesting with the next question. What about Ethereum? How many of you hold a piece of Ethereum? Should be very happy because it's been doing good today. Okay, quite a few of you. Awesome. Okay, next question. How many of you actually have been interested in the technology but have never bought in or actually made the first step? Can you please put your hands up? Okay, but be proud. It's fine. Okay, quite a few of you as well. So as you can see, it's still the very beginning of this ecosystem, which is why it's so exciting that we're here, and which is why there's only a few experts in this room. So that's just something that can be said. How many of you participated in an ICO, an initial coin offering? Can you put your hands up? Okay, kind of this side. This side is not really excited about ICOs. Okay, good. Well, for some numbers, I'm going to go to this quickly, but to give you a perspective of who is here, I've asked everyone to share what the knowledge was around blockchain technology, and these are some stats. So actually, there's a line there in fine blue. That person said he's never heard of blockchain, which was really interesting. I was like, well, okay, you might be in the right place, but we have 20% newbies here. So 20% who really, are very new but very interested. So welcome to those. We've got 13% who don't really understand it yet but are excited about it. We have about 32 who are quite new but understand it. So have made their first investment or know actually how a blockchain is built. And then we have 25 moderately knowledgeable people. So I think, there's really a wide range of different people. And last but not least, we have only 10% who are comfortable enough to say very knowledgeable. And to tell you the truth, I actually put all the ConsenSys guys in very knowledgeable myself. So the real number is actually 5%, right? So it's really a really, really great opportunity to be here, to learn, to ask questions, and to not be shy. Okay, so it's really not about being shy. We want this to be interactive. We're going to have awesome speakers. Think about what you could ask them and how you could learn. And so do that and take your chance to ask questions. And last but not least, don't worry to be this guy because we're all here to learn and share. Okay, so without this, I would like to now, it's your turn, Stanislas. The stage is yours. Thank you.
Well, it's indeed super bright. Thanks. Every second that passes by, around 3 Bitcoin transactions are made. That means there is around 300,000 Bitcoin transactions made per day. Now, it may sound like a very high number, but in the same amount of time, Visa processes 150 million transactions. What if I tell you that 1 Bitcoin transaction consumes the equivalent of 215 kilowatt per hours? It's the same amount of energy required to run a comfortable house for nearly a week. You wouldn't think of Bitcoin as a very advanced technology, would you? So what's the buzz about blockchain? And what are those ICOs everybody's talking about? My name is Stanislas. I've been working for Mosaic Ventures for 2 years now, focusing mainly on company scoring. And I've been involved in mainly in Ethereum since 2014, thanks to a friend who introduced me to Ether. And I've developed a couple proof of concepts, smart contracts, and things like that. So let's start. Tonight, I'll present you blockchain and ICOs so that you can leave the room with a better understanding of both, and hopefully be aware of the challenges that both things, blockchain and ICOs, need to address in order to become mainstream. I've simplified a lot of things to make it easier for the 20% people that never heard about blockchain before, don't really understand it at all. So to the geeks that are in the place, It's not against you. I made a lot of work to remove the technical bits. The presentation should last around 10 minutes, followed by, 15 minutes. Yeah, 15 minutes, followed by a 10-minute Q&A. And I will start this presentation by asking you a simple question. What's wrong with currencies today? So the main problem with currencies today, according to the anonymous inventor of Bitcoin in 2008, is all the trust that's required to make them work. If we have a look at what happens behind the scenes when we buy a simple coffee in the morning, we realize how complex the transaction is. We're not just giving money to a merchant. The money flows through several intermediaries before actually going back to the merchant and displaying a payment approved message on the point of sale. It's easy to identify some issues with the flows I've just presented before. Obviously, the more complex the flow, the more middlemen are required to deal with the transactions. And also, the merchants require dedicated equipment to operate credit card transactions, and fraud detection is done by third parties. So how come the system works that way? Like, what's the point of having so many people in the game? Well, we have to realize that these middlemen add value. They provide the necessary payment infrastructure. They handle all the relationships with actors, and they're also responsible for compliance. So I wrote KYC AML, and Danilo was not keen on me writing it. KYC means know your customer, and AML, means anti-money laundering. So both are really important things to know when it comes to payment processing. These services obviously come at a cost, which is mostly borne by merchants. So there are some other drawbacks as well. Settlement is really slow across actors because there are so many actors. And small transactions are really cost prohibitive because everyone is taking a share of the transaction. So this leaves us wondering what happens if someone makes a faulty transaction or registers a wrong amount, makes a faulty transactions, or if a piece of infrastructure is faulty within all that process. What if, instead of all of this, we could have peer-to-peer transactions? What if I could just send money to someone without any intermediaries? Just as if I gave him some cash in the end. The cost would be probably automatically reduced because most of the middlemen would be gone. And maybe we could enable some small transactions on the network. It wouldn't be so prohibitive. So the answer to the list of problems I've just talked about is the blockchain. And it all boils down to trust. So how does the blockchain enable trust, and how does it work, generally speaking? Let's start by asking ourselves what a transaction is. A transaction is just a simple entry in a register. So I'm sending money to Joe, sending him $1,000. I just write down money is going from me to Joe, $1,000, the date. If we want to get rid of middlemen, we need to maintain and share the register among ourselves. And the question is obviously, how can we do this? Could we maintain the register among ourselves? So let's take a simple example. 10 people, all willing to give up on banks, and two very important things. Each of them has the details of each other's account without knowing their identity. And every one of them also has an empty folder in which they will add a collection of pages that will form a register that tracks transactions. So these are my people. Everyone is writing to write any transaction occurring in the network, and well, they look cool. Suddenly, number 2 wants to send money to number 9, wants to send $10. To make that transaction, number 2 will shout and tell everyone in the network, hey, I want to transfer $10 to number 9. So please write it down your page. Everyone will then check whether number 2 has enough balance to do so. And remember that they can do this, mostly because they have each other's account details. And if number 2 has enough balance, then the transaction is registered, and everyone will write it down on their own page. At this point, the first transaction is complete. It's been written down by everyone. And, well, we'll go to the next slide. Over time, people will want to transact more, send more money. And what will happen is they will follow the same process. They will announce a transaction. The request will be checked by everyone within the network. And for each person, if they have enough balance, the transaction will be processed and written down by everybody in the network on their page. Transactions will continue occurring like this until everyone runs out of space on the page. So what happens when the page is full? They will put away the page in the folder and seal it. So sealing the page is a very important process. It's a key process to understanding blockchain. And it means basically preventing someone from editing the page at any point in time. This crucial process uses cryptography techniques to produce a sealing key from an input. And in our case, the input is the key from the previous seal and our page, where the transactions are recorded. Because this process requires a lot of processing power, all 10 people in the example will compete to find that key as quickly as possible. The first one to find it will broadcast the key to other people in the network, and everyone will check whether that key is valid. If all agree that the key is valid, the key will form the seal to the page, and the first guy that found the key will be rewarded for his work. And he will be paid for this. He will be paid in the system's money. So for example, Bitcoin, he will receive Bitcoins because, well, it just validated the page. This example is just roughly how Bitcoin works. And here are the key terms. So in our example, a single page would be a block of transactions. The folder where we progressively add the pages will be a chain of blocks, so blockchain. The sealing will be called mining. The sealing key is called proof of work, and the black box, I don't know if you remember that strange figure, it's called a hash function. I don't want to elaborate too much on hash functions. It's just a cryptography box. There is an input, there is an output, and it's very hard to find a solution. So there obviously are some other blockchains, and namely the most famous one is Ethereum. So Bitcoin took off, and people soon realized that, well, blockchain was really interesting and could be used to do other things than just transfer money between people. What if blockchain could just register, track medical data, or process complex financial transactions? The problem was that the Bitcoin network didn't enable them to do so. So Ethereum emerged as a platform to host scripts called smart contracts on the blockchain. And this would enable people to host code able to interact with the blockchain and therefore execute transactions in a trusted environment. smart contracts are just pieces of code that run on the blockchain, and the only, like, the closest analogy to a web app I could find is, well, the smart contract is the kind of the back-end part of an application, of a decentralized application. The key thing to remember here is that smart contracts can be so complex that they can allow for the creation of new cryptocurrencies. And if you can create new cryptocurrencies, then you can do ICOs. ICOs are similar to a crowdfunding campaign that offer tokens to buyers in exchange of cryptocurrencies. And they accept cryptocurrencies because they need a more liquid money, such as Bitcoin or Ethers. There are kind of digital coupons that enable a person to get a service and can also be used as a way to incentivize people. For example, you could get paid for sharing your hard drive with the blockchain. Here are a couple of ICOs that did great. So I'll just mention the biggest one. The first one is Tesos. Tesos is quite interesting because they raised 232 million without product, I think, and already has governance issues. How surprising. Banker raised 140 million in 3 hours, and Polkadot, one of the latest, raised 140 million, half of which I think is blocked because of a hack. So to recap, yeah, that's true. So to recap, the blockchain affects all verticals because, well, trust is needed in all organizations, and it enables drastic cost reductions. ICOs, on their side, are another way to get funding for companies. Very interesting way. And the main use is incentivization. They enable very innovative business models around incentivization. If I go back to that slide, Filecoin, for example, will give you some coins for hosting data on your laptop, on your computer. The spectacular growth of cryptocurrencies values received a lot of media attention, and as a result, brought a lot of people into that market. I'm not here to judge, but well, this growth can be observed in a lot of charts. So I've compiled like a couple of charts that show you how fast the ecosystem is growing. This is the Bitcoin market cap. So it was, there is a 1, so it's 137 billion valuation almost today. The Bitcoin trading volume, it's very interesting to see that it can change so dramatically and oscillate depending on the like pump and dumps actions. The Ethereum market cap has risen really sharply as well. It's now 35 billion. And the all-time cumulative ICO funding has basically over a year and a half has gone from mostly nothing to 3 billion. Here is the total crypto market cap, 250 billion. It's quite a lot over a short time, over such a short time span. And I didn't want to finish this presentation without talking about the challenges blockchain needs to address. Firstly, there are some obvious governance issues. It's often said that code is low in blockchain. And to me, it's kind of a wrong thing. Code is not low. You can't write good code. It's mostly buggy the first time you write it. So how could you say that the blockchain will determine how an organization would function and take care of all exceptions that may happen? So what if there is a hack? What would happen? There is another issue, which is regulation. The blockchain being decentralized, it's very hard for governments to regulate it. Can be a good thing, can be a really bad thing as well. I'm thinking about something I read a couple days ago. There is an alternative rights company that's trying to make an ICO right now. And I think nobody knows how to stop them and prevent them from doing this. So how do you prevent people from making bad things using a platform that enables them to do it freely? Secondly, the blockchain is meant to bring consensus. And so I wrote not so consensual ConsenSys, because even if you can bring a voting system on a digital platform and something that guarantees that each and every person that is voting within a platform is a unique person, you can't be sure that everyone will vote. It's a very geeky sector, so people are so not everybody can vote, basically, and because it's too complex. And on the other hand, we've seen a lot of forks lately. So Bitcoin has forked once. Ethereum has forked, and even though there should be consensus around which direction the blockchain is taking, there is no consensus. So lastly, there are some obvious scaling issues for the blockchain. As I mentioned it in my introduction, Bitcoin has a theoretical maximum number of transactions of 8 per second, while Visa can grow up to 50,000. So it will be very difficult to increase the throughput of transactions for blockchain. It's not like a very simple problem to tackle. And I'll finish on the energy side of things. Bitcoin is consuming a lot of energy, and proof of work, which is the core functionality of Bitcoin, is you can't replace it like this. It's not something that you can change easily. So where does this go? Will there be a point where mining will take so much energy that it's not worth it, and the energy required to mine like a single Bitcoin will overcome the actual cost of the Bitcoin? Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Danilo, for inviting me. And if you have some questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Questions? Yes. There you go.
About your last point about the Bitcoin network using too much energy to be worth mining.
It could possibly arrive, yeah.
Yeah, but isn't that not already the case? Because my understanding was that the reason why most mining pools are in China is that electricity is paid for by the government. So then the people mining it don't actually have to pay for electricity, which gives them an advantage in this sense.
Then probably, I'm not sure about this, but then how would you explain that people are still mining Bitcoin elsewhere?
I guess it costs them more. I don't know. Yeah, that's what my question is.
So yeah, if everyone technical has the answer to this, but I think it's still profitable.
It's not free. It's they overbuild their hydro dam infrastructure, so certain areas are subsidizing electricity. But it is still worth mining it, if not for the current price of Bitcoin, then just by the increase itself is why people are actually mining it where the electricity cost doesn't make sense. Yeah, I still mine it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, great presentation. Thanks for that. So I understand that Bitcoin's kind of capped at 21 million Bitcoin, which kind of makes sense to me, like governments regulate how much money should go into the economy. But what happens when...
Bitcoin has a limited supply.
Bitcoin does, you're right. But what happens when they introduce all these new coins, so Ethereum and Litecoin? Because you're essentially making the bigger pot just diluted, right?
I mean, does your question relate on the number of... on the money supply or on governance? Because Ethereum, correct me if I'm wrong, but Ethereum has an infinite supply. It's just Ethereum determine.
But Ethereum will never hit an infinite supply. Ethereum with transition proof of stake will probably cap at 100 million.
Okay, proof of stake will cap it. I didn't mention proof of stake, but okay. Then yeah, Ethereum would have a finite supply. I'm sure there are some other projects that have infinite supply, but I don't know how government would enforce the supply of coins in a decentralized architecture.
Yeah, it's risky, right?
It's one of the problems.
Just that.
It's good presentation, Stanislas. It's actually not very risky. Every coin has a specific function. So, I mean, the end goal of using or building a different coin is for bringing to the economy a different function that people probably use the coin for. So Bitcoin is at the moment used for money. Ethereum would probably be used for sharing information through smart contract and all this stuff, and Litecoin for anonymous transaction. So by building a new coin, it depends how people want to adopt the coin. At the moment, it's a very bubble, so people are trying to bet on the next coin and to make money. But probably in the 5 next years, when the coin and when the bubble explode, then people will just focus on the need and focus on what actually the coin is trying to solve as a problem.
When does it stop becoming a cryptocurrency and start just being a user
I think there's sorry, keep down.
Vas-y.
So it's all the problem of the ICO stuff. Is ICO? Are you trying to build an ICO which the token is a utility token or security token? So the security token is basically to make money, and a utility token is the question is the token will be used by the project, by people? I mean, it's like because at the end you can just use Ethereum for everything, yeah. So that's the main problem. So people are trying to make ICO and try to build new coin and new token, but at the end, it's probably likely that no one will actually use the coin for. They would just stick to Ethereum, for example, because Ethereum does everything.
Just on the topic of performance, so that seems to be one of the main challenges. And I was listening to this podcast, which I like a lot, by ConsenSys or ex-ConsenSys guy. It's used to be called Ether Review, now it's the Third Web. And one of the arguments was made there that a centralized system will always be faster than a decentralized system, because you have n nodes, and to the central hub you have 1 plus n connection. In a decentralized system you have n squared connections. So mathematically, decentralized system will always be slower. So do you agree with that? And maybe you could talk about some of these techniques that Vitalik has mentioned to actually to optimize the system.
I agree with this, but I think it will get, at some point it won't matter. When it's fast enough, it won't matter. It's not fast enough yet, obviously, and otherwise it would be widely used. But that's the main focus of Ethereum right now. They're really focusing on scaling the number of transactions to make them interesting, to make the platform appealing for for companies, basically.
Aren't miners also middlemen?
Sorry?
Aren't miners also middlemen?
That's a tricky question. Thank you. You could see it that way. I met some guy a month ago, which was working in a big bank, and he had just met with the Chinese government, and that was right after the Chinese government banned Bitcoin exchanges. And he basically told me that there was so much concentration of Bitcoin in China that Bitcoin was starting to be used as a currency within China, within 8 million cities, which was a huge threat. To come back to what you say, it means the supply of Bitcoin is mostly managed by Chinese mining farms. And if it's the case, yes, you could see them as a middleman as well, because they're taking their share of a transaction.
I had a follow-up to the fixed supply question. Like the main point of mining is you get bitcoins for mining. Just to take the Bitcoin example, when you hit the supply limit, all of a sudden there are no more bitcoins. So no one has any incentive to mine, so no more transactions can get verified, and the coin becomes useless, right?
The transaction costs actually rise. That's the plan. So they get paid because the cost rises.
Okay.
Every Bitcoin transaction has embedded a transaction fee as part of the protocol. A small amount of the Bitcoin you send go to the miner every time. And the white paper anticipates that when the supply gets fixed, the transaction fees need to cover the cost of mining. And so if you actually want your transaction to get mined on Bitcoin, there's a similar issue on Ethereum.
If you actually want your transaction to get mined, you need to get your transaction fee sufficiently high to get it included in a block.
So that means that unless they fundamentally solve some technical issues, it is unsustainable in the long run. Am I right?
Why? I mean, just the fees will go up to cover the cost of electricity.
It might not be worth it for very small transactions.
Yeah, so that's why micropayments, so one use case that's not working well on blockchain today is micropayments, which is why we have state channels and the Raiden network and Lightning and Thunder on Bitcoin.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions?
One more? No. Yeah, okay, there's one more. The last one, then we have to go to the panel.
Can you just talk really quickly about privacy? In your example, everybody sees everything. I'm not really comfortable with
So
my
that
bank
was
account
a
details
tricky
being visible
thing
to
to
everyone.
explain. So you can go into an Ethereum, for example, Explorer in your browser. There is one called Etherscan, and you will see all transactions for an account, but you won't know who owns the account. You can be sure one person owns it, but you won't know who. So it's as simple as this. It's there is complete transparency in terms of transactions, but at the same time, you don't know the identity of people. Sorry? Of course, you could track transactions. There are plenty of ways to track transactions, but Bitcoin and Ethereum still provide more anonymity than casual transaction systems.
So there are three privacy strategies for Ethereum. One is state channels, so doing off-chain transactions, and then putting the result back
the chain. The second is zero-knowledge proofs. And the third is building privacy directly into the protocol. So having private channels, having private transactions embedded within other transactions, which is how Quorum works.
There are other solutions as well.
Yeah, so Zcash is zero-knowledge proofs, right? It's a zero-knowledge proof pool implemented on Bitcoin. Well, implemented on Zcash and coming to Ethereum.
Mic not working anymore? No? The mic not working anymore?
No, I've been cut.
Big round of applause. Thank you. So if we could get all the speakers on board, please, that would be really cool. Awesome. Usually at YouTube, we actually put the subscriber count next to the picture. I guess in crypto, you can't really put the number of Bitcoins each of these people hold or Ethereum. That probably wouldn't be the right thing to do. But yeah, we are really excited to have all of you here. Thanks so much for coming here and sharing your insights. Of course, we have a different set of backgrounds as well as different set of skills amongst the panel. So it'd be great if we could please start with a quick introduction, maybe from you.
Sure.
Go all through the panel and just talk about what your background is and what you're working on these days.
All right. Okay. Thank you. So, background. Well, I do work in financial services. I kind of found myself in the middle of financial services at some point, but started financial services through a technology company, which then was a technology company which built solutions for financial services. So I'm probably always in the middle of business, technology, products for financial services, and so forth. So about in 2013, I started hearing about Bitcoin, and I was an executive at London Stock Exchange at that time, and we were building all kinds of new derivatives products and instruments and so forth. So got very excited about it, and because I was always wondering why we are building products like this, and there might be other ways of doing it. So Bitcoin got me excited. I left. I actually started getting into deep into Bitcoin world, went from meetup to conferences all over the world, not even just only here, very, very early on. I was one of the founders of UK Digital Currency Association, that kind of stuff, and got very excited about color coins. So I spent last couple of years basically trying to figure out how financial services could use blockchain technologies. At that time, we were calling it the underlying technology of Bitcoin. Ethereum, everything else came later. I got involved in a number of projects, R3 to Hyperledger to Clearmatics, a number of them. So this year I joined State Street, and my objective is exactly the same. And I am very much looking into next generation products in financial services, which often use these kind of technologies. I don't really necessarily care about one technology or other, because I think that this is not the right way of thinking about things when you are building, when you think about next generation of an industry. In this case, it's financial services, but I think it's very, very important to understand the intersection of business, technology, the tools, regulation, that everything goes around it. So that's what I do, and I stop now. Yeah.
Well, you do a lot of stuff, so it's a long introduction.
Oh, there is even more. Don't even get me started.
Okay. Jeremy, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so my name is Jeremy Miller. In this space, I help manage two organizations. One is ConsenSys, which is now about 500 people in 27 countries around the world working on a variety of Ethereum projects, which we're going to talk about. I think we have a few slides later on that. And then the other is I was the chief antagonist and founding board member of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, which is responsible for driving enterprise requirements into the Ethereum protocol, which I think we're going to talk a bit about that later too.
Great. So I'm Christina Frankopan, and my background is as a financial strategist and corporate strategist with an interlude as an entrepreneur, fashion tech, completely different. My genesis to this world came after the financial crisis, and I was trying to think how one can be investing and acting as a financial services professional in a slightly more responsible way, and thinking about the impact of what one does with one's capital if one's implementing investing or advising investors. So I got involved in alternative finance movements, mostly stuff that had sprung out of kind of ESG movements, impact investing in particular. That made me very quickly aware of what was going on in the Bitcoin space, but I will be honest, it didn't particularly excite me until I discovered Ethereum, basically, in 2015. So that's my genesis, and now my main project is advising VC investors in this space, but long-term aligned with open source objectives culturally and otherwise.
Awesome. Lee, next.
Yeah. Hi, Lee Bacon. I'm a partner in the international law firm Clyde & Co. We have about 40-something offices in 26 different countries, 4,000 people, but it did take us about 100 years to get there, so you're much quicker than us. Also, we established a few months ago a consultancy, what we're calling a smart contracts consultancy. I use that phrase with some hesitation because they're often not contracts or particularly smart on occasion, but we've aligned legal lawyers in our network of offices, but also external software coding and developers to provide advice, essentially to incumbents, to the existing markets, our chosen markets, which are driven by energy, transportation, aviation and marine, insurance, and trading commodities. And so we're working with them to kind of put in place real-world commercial applications in this sector. So not a technologist, so be nice to me, be easy. You know, it's slightly scary when you've got all these people who fully understand the technology, but a really interesting space in terms of understanding how the technology can be used by our existing clients and also the threats that many of them face, like kind of people using the technology in a way that they don't really understand.
Awesome. Well, so pick your victim, guys, and then think about who the person is you want to ask a cool question for. So as you see, we have a really wide range of backgrounds here. As a first question, I'll keep it easy. I wanted to ask Pinar if you could please tell us why are you excited about blockchain technology, both on a personal level, on a professional level, and even on a social level. Like, what's the impact it can have on the world?
Okay, so let's kind of define the terms, because I think I have been hearing so many somewhat loose terms always, like blockchain, distributed ledger technologies, or Bitcoin, and everything is like it becomes a bit blurry. But in a short way, before we go too much into it, I am interested in general in this whole more peer-to-peer nature of markets, like markets becoming a bit more peer-to-peer. I am interested in overall decentralization movement. I mean, it's so if we are talking about blockchain in that case, I mean, I am interested in that. So I am not generally interested in I don't get excited about technology alone. I usually get excited about what they can help you to do, what the impact is. So I am excited about those. I mean, I am interested in blockchain being a kind of foundational infrastructure or a version of blockchains, or this paradigm for that, like decentralization and peer-to-peer nature of what we do. Other side of it is I'm actually quite interested in the kind of creation of, like, changing the way that the instruments are created, and the whole process itself, how they can serve the clients. And those are, I mean, I think it's really implying, and it's really helping some people become more creative about the way they think about it. It's not happening very fast. That's another thing. There's also a bit of a geeky one. I am kind of interested in the deep into like these cryptography techniques, those kind of like what you can do with some of these cryptography techniques and privacy and so forth. But like a bit geeky, very neat, like deep into that. I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I think in this world it should be like either you have a big vision and you're kind of high level, or you are really you know what you're talking about at the deep level. So that's what I kind of try to figure out.
Awesome. Now I know there is also a few deep tech guys in the audience, so after we'll definitely catch them as well.
God, I now put
think
myself
also
out
the panel can share a lot of insights on that note. We'll get to a technical question very soon. Before, I actually wanted to address a follow-up question to Lee. So, I mean, I would love to hear all of your thoughts on why blockchain is interesting, but specifically in your case, maybe you can share with us a little bit from a legal point of view, like.
It's very similar to Pinar, actually. I mean, I should have said at the outset, I don't have any bitcoins. I could use professional conflict rules as an excuse. It's my innate cautious kind of conservatism, I think. But we see it, and the way we explain it to clients is that we see the blockchain distributed ledger technology as a utility, essentially, which will enable digital transactions. So there have been blockers on that. When you're transacting between two or more parties, you need verification, you need proof of what's happened, who the parties are. The blockchain technologies enables that to happen. So it's enabling technology for all sorts of transactions. We've used an analogy in the past in terms of it's not dissimilar to kind of the rail network or the canal network or the turnpike roads in the 19th, 18th centuries. That development, very early stages, you've kind of got a proliferation of private schemes, and there's no yet one utility, one network. And interested, Christina, you're talking about the kind of the open source consensus. I think that's key to that. There are some blocks to that now. I mean, one of the issues raised before was security. And Jeremy, you mentioned zero knowledge proofs. I think that's a potentially a real breakthrough in terms of having commercial clients getting that level of comfort. Because frankly, the idea that your transaction is verified in a distributed manner by miners in China, if you're one of the incumbent financial services companies, is really quite unsettling. So really, that's one area is looking at new areas of business and new possibilities of business. Second area of excitement for me from a legal perspective is really it forces you to look at first principles. Yeah. So the technology, I like to think I have an understanding of the technology, more its implications, but it's then what forces you to look at the legal framework around that. It's really fascinating. And there was a comment I came across recently was saying the technology is completely new, but the legal issues in terms of what's a contract, what's an offer, what's an acceptance, what's the transaction, who are the parties to a contract when you have a distributed network, are really fascinating from a legal perspective. I won't bore you with all of the details, and talk to you later if you're really interested, but it's kind of old principles to the new technology. And I know that you're talking about the kind of the framework for this, it's really the opportunity to develop new commercial frameworks. That's really exciting from a legal perspective. One real-world example, bills of lading. It's one of the oldest kind of forms of contracts. It's in the shipping world. It's not my area, but in the shipping world, it's a paper document that passes from the seller of goods to the shipper, to the buyer of goods. It has to be under an act from 1882, if you're interested. Has to be the paper document. Has to then be signed by each party, and that enables title in that good to be transferred, but also the financiers, the banks, to have security in that. Currently, that can't happen on an electronic basis unless you're a member of a private club. But there is already, within the relevant UK legislation, the authority for the relevant Minister of State to enable that. And if somebody gets that right, and then having that without having that paper chain, it can open a whole new kind of a whole new world of commercial transactions. You do have issues. You have issues like we've mentioned before, KYC, know your client, regulatory issues. You have sanctions issues. How do you know in a distributed network that you've got the requisite controls in place to make sure you're not in breach of any of these regulations? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in many transactions, but it's all doable.
It's all doable. That's it's a good way to think of the future. Awesome. Thanks, Lee. Christina, I have a next question for you. Now, I think, how many techies are there in the audience? Can you please put your hands up? Okay, so about 30%, I would say. Awesome. I think you guys can get excited about this one. But Christina, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about the challenges of blockchains, actually, right? So we've heard things like structural challenges or problems with scaling, overall security issues. Can you maybe talk us about the...
Yeah, sure. Okay, first of all, I'm not the technologist, so there's nothing more humbling than actually being in a room full of Googlers and ex-Googlers and a number of people who put up their hands, by the way, including my children, who are future Googlers unless he hires them first, which is pretty likely. So yeah, I'm not a technologist, but again, as one of my children says, you don't have to understand everything about blockchain. You don't even have to care about blockchain. You just have to write down your private keys and put them in your fairy money box. So you can still get, as she does, and she's 8, just turned 9, she gets the gist of it, and so I too have the gist of the strategic possibilities of this technology, including some of the scaling and security issues you mentioned, but I'm not a technologist. So I'm also completely passionate about this space and excited about what can be, including the ideas of permissionless innovation that we can invent to completely disrupt industries and indeed maybe the nation state. But I'm also a total bear, so I'm completely not interested and excited with some of the stuff, the fluffy stuff that's going on in the market. So when we're talking about things like scaling, sensible people, hopefully including some of us, are thinking about long-term solutions, and some of the work being done on the scaling side, on sharding, for example. There's a proposition recently that's related effectively, the work that Vitalik Ethereum has been doing on sharding. Basically, the idea is that you have small groups of trusted nodes that will verify transactions instead of having the whole network verify transactions, and that's a much more efficient solution. roughly, if the technologist wants to interject. That's roughly how it works. Does that work roughly?
Yeah, you will basically split part of the transaction in multiple small transactions, and people will be verifying the transaction.
Sure.
Yeah, so small batches of transactions.
Small batches of transactions. Okay, so you're taking it into a series of nodes rather than sending it out through the whole network, if I understand.
Well, because you'll be using proof of stake and all stuff.
Exactly. Okay. Anyway, so and Plasma is a related piece of work, and then there's obviously Jeremy has mentioned state channels and what can be done for micropayments, and that's potentially incredibly efficient solutions or Lightning on the Bitcoin network. Those solutions are still relatively young and still need to be road tested, and I think a lot of the projects that we're seeing who need to have scalability solutions are waiting on those, and I think we do need to have a little bit of patience, because although those are the roadmaps are well laid out, we're still talking 18 months, 2 years on a lot of those potential solutions, and we don't yet know what the security vectors are going to be.
It's interesting you mentioned patience. I've often heard this quote of, in crypto, 6 months in crypto feels like 2 years. Like, what would be your answer to that? Of course, on a technological level, maybe that's a bit not true, right? In terms of like all the new stuff happening, the space moves fast, right?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it does. But I mean, don't forget all the work that went into the original Bitcoin white paper is actually based on a lot of historical research and cryptography and other areas that are not new. I mean, it was just the marriage of a series of things that was innovative. And Ethereum too, I mean, you're adding a layer of incentive structures on top of it through the ability to code on top of the network. But effectively, those are not novel ideas in terms of incentive designs and so on. It's just you do need to bottom out some of the attack vectors that raises, and that's why you see people falling over, and there are bugs in codes. And again, there's a lot of work being done and research on upgradable smart contracts and other kinds of approaches to dealing with those risk factors.
Okay, thanks for that, Christina. Jeremy, next question I had for you, and I know it's around the topic that a lot of you are interested in, and I know you have a special opinion about it, so I'm really excited to hear your answer to that. But I wanted to ask you about ICOs, right? So I recently came across a video on Twitter where CNBC asked two very prominent people in the industry, one Brad Garlinghouse, the founder of Ripple, a specific question about ICOs, and then also to Joseph Lubin, the founder of ConsenSys, the same question: what's your take on ICOs? And they had different opinions, and so I wanted to hear what Jeremy thought of that, right? So Brad Garlinghouse called them, in one word, very easily, he called them fraud. That was his answer. While on the other hand, Joseph called them as speculative, which was very interesting. And he followed up saying they're speculative, but speculation is good for innovation, why it is that they're very important in creating foundational infrastructure. Can you follow up on that?
Sure. So Joe's answer, that part of Joe's answer actually followed about a 5-minute answer to the question. Okay. So it was one soundbite taken a little bit out of context. But just to explain the specific quote, and then I'll explain the longer answer Joe gave during the interview. The specific context is effectively Amazon was created in a bubble, right? PayPal was created in a bubble. And when we see bubbles and large portions of capital pouring into new and speculative industries, we still see new leaders of those industries being created, right? Someone at a party a few days ago mentioned, the tulip bubble may have been a bubble, but Holland is still a leader in flowers globally 100 years later, right? So Joe's point is, bubbles can be a sign of a tremendous amount of innovation and people wanting to move very quickly into that space. And, but that doesn't mean that there aren't great things going on. But the broader context and what wasn't included in that video was really the fact that, ICOs probably isn't the right term to use. We're pretty disciplined in referring to software tokens and token design and token mechanics around how to create peer-to-peer open marketplaces. ICO sounds a little overly speculative for our taste. If speculation is a reason, it could be a security, right? If speculation is a reason to buy something, it could make that thing a security under certain circumstances. So, when we look at these markets, especially at the platforms we're creating, we're very focused on the utility, right? We're really focused on, does this token do something meaningful and useful, and looking at it accordingly. So there's a broader context, and we are certainly on the token side of the discussion.
Interesting. And that's probably also when you select the specific companies to support, you probably look at the utility. Can you maybe talk a little bit about some other companies you guys have within your ecosystem, within your portfolio?
Sure. So, the definition of our portfolio is expanding very broadly. Some of you may have been there when we announced we were going to crowdsource a company. So not crowdsource an idea or crowdfund an idea, but crowdsource an entire company, and to try and distribute and decentralize the creation of a company through a broad group of people. We support companies in their token launches, so we help companies design tokens and distribute their tokens into the marketplace, in addition to the 40+ projects that we're building internally. So to some degree, ConsenSys is a microcosm of the entire ecosystem, which is one of the reasons why it's a really interesting place to work. #WeAreHiring.
Remember, we're recording. Oh, the kids, yes. Where are they? Are they still here? Yeah, there they are. Awesome. Well, they have a while to go. They're 8 years old, right? So it takes, give them 10 years. Okay. Actually, Christina, I wanted you to follow up on this whole topic of ICOs, or let's call them token designs and token generation events from now on. So what do you think about them? And for people, hearing about them, wanting to potentially invest in them, what are some of the things they should be careful on, or what are some of the things they should be looking at in terms of finding an interesting new company?
I mean, I'm very broadly aligned with what Jeremy has said, for a start. We also think very seriously about the utility of the token, and do you actually need it? And typically that is not the case. I think if you're interested in investing in these markets, I think you might as well be aware that the majority, if not 90% of what you're seeing out there is rubbish, frankly. Sorry to put it like that, but and I also agree that maybe there are some benefits to the sort of bubble, in the sense that can force innovation, certainly make the system more resilient as we learn from mistakes. I think if you're serious about it, you do actually have to research it and read the white paper, or delegate that to somebody else who knows what they're doing. You need to research the team. You need to understand who you're actually dealing with, the governance terms and more that are associated with that. And frankly, I think you need to also be conscious these are basically unregulated markets, possibly wrongly so, as in many times they are actually securities, and people are going to get in trouble for that. But in that context, you can and will be manipulated if you don't know what you're doing. So there's a lot of FOMO, people pumping stuff and dumping stuff, and if you don't know what you're doing, you're likely to be a victim of that. So buyer beware.
Be careful. Yes. All right. Cool. So I mean, we've touched upon the topic of Bitcoin. We're going to go more in depth into Ethereum. We've mentioned ICOs. One question I had for you, Pinar, was a lot of corporates are really interested in this space, right? So the world's top banks, State Street, the company you're working at, like, why are these large corporations and financial institutions thinking about blockchain? Why are they building on blockchain? Why are they teaming up with companies like ConsenSys? What's it all about, and what's in it for them?
Okay, this is the boring part of the whole conversation. Now, so all right, so many corporates are interested in, again, things related to this whole blockchain conversation. Many of them are actually interested in what is called more distributed ledger technologies, which is potentially just a technology that one could use to build new, like more efficient automation, better automated infrastructures within their own organization. So there is a lot of like a lot going on there, which is, I would argue, is a more internal infrastructure conversation and not quite in the same, shouldn't be really thought of the same way that people are thinking about these platforms, networks, and actually, in fact, like even between the banks or corporates and clients coming together to build something completely new is not most of the conversation, but it's also happening as well. So I think most of the, we are, okay, so first of all, most of the corporations are interested in this because there is, it's actually, everybody is talking about it, and there is something there around the future of financial services and the impact on our business. And in fact, the right way of thinking about it is actually we could really redesign many things that we are doing. And I think we are not quite there yet thinking about it the right way, if you think if really, to be honest. But I think we are on the way to discover that. That's one thing. But internally, that's the conversation that's going on. Like that's what banks are usually working on. One thing that we are working on, for example, is, and maybe this might make things a bit more interesting when I add a few more things, is something called utility settlement coin. And we are working on that with Clearmatics and 11 banks and the financial services institutions, I should say. And it is basically the cash leg of every settlement. And it's very foundational. It is looking to create an instrument which will act which will have the attributes of central bank money. So that's where I think things can get to be more interesting, because there we are starting talking about future of money, the central bank digital cash instruments, different types of, treating different types of money in different ways, and you can do more things between the banks and corporates and the clients if you actually start thinking that way. Yeah. So it's a very foundational topic, but it is really a spectrum of lots of different projects. But I think mostly they are not really the blockchain they are not really the blockchain projects the way that we are talking about it, thinking about it here mostly, I think.
Sorry, what was that project called?
Utility Settlement Coin Project. It's USC Utility Settlement Coin Project.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I realized I skipped your question, Lee. But I'm coming back to it.
So I'm glad you skipped
I saw you. Okay, yeah. So tying this into what we discussed before around ICOs and token generation events, and you're looking at sort of the perspective from corporates and why they're interested in blockchain technology. Maybe you can talk to us from a legal standpoint. We've seen tremendous growth. At the same time, of course, there is risk. Often we have this conversation around are token securities or not. There's a lot of debate. Maybe you can talk to us a little about what your take on is and share some view.
Again, with Pinar, our focus is very much generally on the kind of using the blockchain technology for transactions, but the ICO world is it's so popular. It's so much hype at the minute. I Googled this afternoon the number of ICO transactions, so the answer has to be right, clearly. $3.3 billion have been raised in the last 12 months in more than 200 ICOs. Wow. Now, I know that just as us, as one law firm, colleagues here, and mostly in the Middle East, we've been involved in about 8 or 10 of those, so that's 4 or 5%. And there is a lot of nonsense out there. A lot of stuff comes to us, and we kind of pick up the phone to the client and say, are you sure? Do you really know what's going on here? But equally, there's some value there, so there's some innovative work going on. It's difficult to generalize. I'm not a securities lawyer, you'll be glad to hear, because that would be a very dull conversation. But absolutely, the devil is in the detail in terms of whether it's a security or not, and therefore subject to regulation. It depends which jurisdiction you're in, US, UK, elsewhere. Frankly, on a decentralized platform, identifying which jurisdiction you're subject to which regulatory jurisdiction you're subject to is a whole kind of piece in itself. Some of you may be aware the FCA, so the UK regulator, issued some guidelines recently. Basically, Christina summarised in buyer beware. You can structure a token, certainly if it's a utility token, in a way in which it won't attract the fairly kind of stringent security regulatory. The regulator is in place for issuing a security, but you have to be really quite careful. And the devil is very much in the detail there. I have to say, I think, again, picking up some of the comments, the wider issue is on the wider governance of these organisations. Understanding exactly how they're being run, who are the stakeholders, what are the interests, what are you getting for your token, if anything, and those wider issues. I think that there seems to be a move towards self-regulation amongst some of the clients that we're speaking to. The more serious involved seem to be saying actually they would really welcome self-regulation as a first step to then having perhaps official regulation, because the regulations that are there for the kind of the mainstream financial services market are difficult to adapt.
Yeah.
But I come from the perspective, maybe I would say this as a lawyer, and I think some regulation is a good thing, but it has to be appropriate. And there does seem to be a movement towards a kind of a self-regulatory move within the tokenized world as a first step.
Can I make 2 comments on that?
Go ahead.
So, we obviously, are very aware of the issues around tokens, but putting, effectively the jurisdictional and securities issues to one side for a second, I think there are 2 points that really cannot get lost in this. First, we've already pretty much disrupted an industry. That industry is early stage venture capital, right? If you look at the amount and the volume of ICOs, and when I go and talk to founders now, most of them tell me, and admittedly, the founders I talk to at conferences are a self-selecting group, but they say, we don't want to raise VC ever again, right? That's not the future, right? So we've already really made a very, very big dent into an established industry. The first industry to be disrupted by blockchain is early stage VC, right? And that disruption is well underway, right? So we have an industry that's being disrupted by blockchain. The second is we have a global financial system, right? That's a new thing. The way you issue a share in London is totally different than how you issue a share in New York. These are not one integrated real-time market. They are separate markets, and they've got band-aids on them to make them global, right? With the Ethereum blockchain, we have a global financial backbone that reaches settlement finality every 14 seconds, right? This is a very big deal. What we do not have, to Lee's point, is we do not have global financial regulations, right? And so there's a really interesting opportunity for regulators to innovate and to say, we need global regulation for a global economy, right? We actually need it. The world went flat 20 years ago, according to Tom Friedman, right? So somewhere along the way, we need the rules to catch up. The technology is caught up, finally, and now we need the rules to catch up too.
I recently heard someone saying that one of the reasons regulations are not there yet is because regulators are fighting for who wants to regulate.
There's a competition amongst regulators to be the most attractive regulatory jurisdiction, but as you say, kind of missing the point.
Kind of missing the point.
To be the scariest.
Kind of missing the point, right? We need a global regulatory regime.
I agree with you. I think the likelihood of that being achieved is low, and I think actually
absolutely.
what we're going to see is the innovative solutions coming from this community, where, I don't know, you may be containerizing your KYC AML data in some way and that you can reveal and therefore comply on some, we have to find the solutions or find the technologists who will find them.
Yeah, I mean, we've looked at token designs that have a toggle in them, am I a security or not, depending on where they're being traded, who's using them, what's the context. So we've looked at toggleable tokens as an example of a design pattern around dealing with this. Among many other potential approaches.
But I think that's normal, right? I wouldn't expect any coordination amongst regulators around this topic. And so it's an opportunity for people to build things, and it's a commercial opportunity. Yeah.
Well, I think it takes a generation. You have settlements, you have international regulations now, but it's a generational thing. We're talking about absolutely new technology. It's going to take an awful long time to catch up. And I'm conscious, I'm an incumbent in an industry, the legal market, which is ripe for disruption as well within those issues. So it's a fascinating.
Yeah, if you take Zoom law, combine it with some bots and put it on the blockchain, right? That's happening.
Thank you.
I mean, the question is often people talk about mass adoption, right? So I know that my last question is for Jeremy. Before we get to the audience, we'd really like for you to ask some of our speakers some questions, was in regards to the the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance, right? So, and what you guys like, why is that helping mass adoption? You can talk a bit about all the work you do there.
Yeah. So when I'm not, when we're not working on our real work at ConsenSys, I believe, really sits at this interesting intersection of existing markets and future markets, and trying to accelerate that from happening. So a lot of the work we do in energy, a lot of the work that we do in fintech, a lot of the work we do in payments is around that. But the EEA specifically was designed to provide initially a forum for technology to drive enterprise requirements specifically around the performance of the network, privacy, and access control, which are enterprise requirements into the Ethereum protocol. What's interesting, the EEA has, in addition to working on that, and we're getting pretty close on the spec, and we're working very quickly on that, is the emergence of the working group. So there's now more than 10, and I don't remember the exact count, but I suspect it's up to 15 different industry working groups in the EEA, the banking working group, insurance working group, supply chain working group, advertising working group, and another 10 or so, where we've got industry groups coming together to make smart contract specifications, right? We recently announced the legal working group, a bunch of lawyers getting together to talk about the intersection of law and smart contracts, right? So there's a huge amount of participation, actually more participation at an industry level than there is at a technical level, though we are making good progress on the technology. The EEA is up to just under 300 members.
I was going to say there's like the biggest names in the industry, right?
Yeah,
so we have Goldman Sachs and tons of other GE.
I have to say we are a member.
I'm not sure we've quite gotten Goldman Sachs in yet.
No?
I'd have to go and check. I'd have to go and check the website. It's hard to keep track. But it's the largest blockchain consortium in the world and growing very quickly. And I think it's a testament to how well Ethereum is doing as a technology.
Wow. Okay. Amazing. So I hope that gave you a bit of an insight of not only the industry but the different topics. So the technology side, like why corporates are looking into it, and also the legal side. So it would be great to open up questions to the audience. To kick it off, I would actually like to take a question that was posted on Slido. So we told everybody that you could ask questions ahead of the event. So if I could please ask the production crew to put that on the screen, and we will pick up the most upvoted question. And then after, if we can give the microphone to a question from the audience, that would be great. Okay, so first question, and whoever wants to pick that one up, just go ahead, says, what would be the best applications of smart contracts? Who wants to take that one? Christina, I'm looking at you, maybe?
Yeah, look, for a start, many people say that actually the best applications of smart contracts so far are ICOs.
Yeah.
And that in itself it may be exciting if you think that disrupting VC is exciting, but otherwise not very. I think one thing that's been overlooked, and I think, again, bearing in mind that this ecosystem is still very young and there's a lot of experimentation going on, I think people are learning. One thing that I think is very exciting that is evolving is how those incentive systems inherent in smart contracts are being designed. So that they can become more complex over time, and people are experimenting in new ways of not only playing with financial incentives, positive and negative, but also with governance incentives. I actually think that's a really important thing because for one reason, if nothing else, the governance controls or the mechanisms that you have as a contributor to a software token are very weak, and I think we're going to see an evolution of the kinds of control mechanisms that are actually inherent in the smart contract designs themselves, and all the software tokens, if you want to call them that. So, and I think there's a lot of experimentation going on in that area.
So we talk a lot about designing end-sided marketplaces and open platforms. So if you got to think about, and this is about blockchain as an enabling technology of decentralization, right? So, and Joe very eloquently puts it, many of the current customer-supplier relationship today have some degree of adversarial nature to them, right? Or Fred Wilson at Union Square Ventures put it this way: if Uber was built on the blockchain, the riders and the drivers would have participated in the value creation. So for us, we look at smart contract applications fundamentally through two lenses. One is how good a mapping are they to blockchain capabilities, use of digital signatures, use of tokenization, use of decentralized identity, et cetera. We have a mapping for that and a sort of an approach, a framework where we take companies and projects through it. Then the other is, what is the shape of the end-sided marketplace? Who are the platform participants? How should they interact? How should that be governed? What behavior should be incentivized? What behavior should be punished? And what does that design look like? So if you look at Grid Plus and its entry into the non-regulated utility market in Texas and the strategy there, the objective is to provide wholesale electricity prices to retail consumers, right? Through an access token where the purchase of the access token funds the acquisition of the utility, right? I mean, that is an end-sided marketplace. If you look at the work, so when you look at, so when we look at these projects, we look at what does the open marketplace look like, and what is the role of the actors in the value creation and the maintenance of the open marketplace, and using smart contracts as an implementation layer to achieve that.
Very interesting. Any questions from the audience? It would be great to hear from you. So there's a question there. If you could please give the... Yeah, there, Georgie.
I have a question for Jeremy. So Ethereum now is like the platform of choice for developers and for token launches. But there's a lot of competitors, especially like in the last 6 months, a year. Some of them are like quite cool. Some of them are like very aggressive. And some of them kind of try to coexist with Ethereum. Some of them are saying like, we're going to take Ethereum down. Like, how is this going to work out? What's your take on that?
So there have been a number of announced platforms, right? Like, I don't think we see anyone actually taking developer market share from Ethereum right now. Right? A lot of the platforms have been more announcements than actual working software, right? There's a couple of particularly notable ones in that regard. Yeah. So, and many of them are extensions, right? Like, we're big fans of Raiden, right? And implementing state channels. I think one of the things that Ethereum's done very well is it's had flexibility to extend itself. So the work on zero knowledge proofs and the layman's way of saying putting Zcash into Ethereum, is one example, right? Where it wasn't on the Ethereum roadmap. Zcash comes about, Vitalik and Zulu sit down together. They come up with a plan, right? So I think Ethereum right now has the greatest flexibility and the most robust governance model for absorbing good ideas from elsewhere. So I think, Ethereum it's almost a brand, right? As much as a technology at this stage. And, it's just, I think it's unlike, I personally believe at this stage that as good ideas have are developed elsewhere, they'll be adopted first in an Ethereum.
Can I just add something to that? I mean, and the other thing is that, and this is kind of echoing and agreeing with the point, but I mean, the community is a huge part of that, and there's a kind of critical mass element of that, and I think we've kind of passed that point. So I think that there's an incredibly strong and vibrant community of technologists who are interacting and supporting each other in the community. But there's another point that I would like to make, which is that longer term, I think there may be a different multiverse of blockchains that may or may not look quite different, and that's quite an interesting idea about whether you can envisage a world of many versions of public permissionless blockchains, which each have different kinds of features.
Or public permissioned blockchains.
Or public permissioned blockchains. But you could have private. I mean, you can have a series of private blockchains that are interacting in different ways that we can't yet envisage. I think there's all sorts of possibilities, potentially. I don't know.
Any other questions from the audience there? We have one on this side. Oh, can you give the mic, please? Thank you very much.
Looking back to 2013, what will cause the next Bitcoin drop?
The next Bitcoin drop? So we don't comment publicly on prices. Right now, I think there's certainly indications, and if you talk to people privately, there's a lot of what we're seeing right now at a macro level is institutional investment coming into the space, right?
That ties in quite well with the other question that we see here, which is quite popular. So I think you can actually touch upon that as well.
Which one? Many of my friends say Bitcoin is overvalued. so I mean, the valuation bases for these things are not very well established, right? It's an immature market, right? But what we're clearly seeing now is the movement of large-scale institutional investors trying to figure out what to do in the space, right? And some of the early enablers like futures contracts, right? Something they can trade coming in. So one of the problems one of the reasons why the future contracts and the future notes are so critical is today large institutional investors cannot trade Ether and Bitcoin, right? They can't buy it. It's not there isn't a sufficiently regulated wholesale marketplace in which to acquire the coins. However, they can acquire a future, right? Because that's something they can buy. They can trade on exchanges. They can buy those, right? And then you have to figure out how to hedge the underlying. So ultimately, someone has to get the coins. So one of the big macro drivers going on right now is the anticipation and preparation for large cap institutional investment to flow into the space.
Yeah, possibly even public or government investors too.
I mean, just a few comments. I mean, that has been expected for a while, and it's typical, right? I mean, you build a whole new market, and it was mostly retail. So every time that you, I mean, this is really not very new. It's even FX markets were like that a while, not that long time ago, actually. So you are, I mean, it's all about building the market structure under it, bringing some regulation around, building the products so that people can hedge. People actually can go to exchanges, like proper exchanges, and go and find the prices, and you can then use it as an underlying price for ETFs and all sorts of things like that. So people can actually move their funds from one exchange to another, arbitrage opportunities. So all of these things are being developed right now, and it's correct. I completely agree. It's really happening.
Any other questions from the audience? Wow, okay, all of a sudden everyone's excited, that's nice. I think let's go somewhere in the back. There's a question there, I think in the back. Yeah, with the red jumper. Do you want to go ahead? Yeah, yes, go ahead.
So I'm gonna just to follow up on.
Can we have a mic, please, to the person? Where's Rune?
Room to speak louder.
Carolyn, do you want to?
Yeah, there it is. Okay,
perfect. So to follow up on how VCs view this, question for Christina. You mentioned that you do a lot of, that you advise VCs. Did I catch this correctly?
Mm-hmm.
So I would be interested to know what are their top 3 questions. Let's say if they're noobs, they see there's a lot of money flowing around. So if I was a VC, I would just think, okay, there's money here. What can I do with it? Who can I ask? And what are their top 3 questions? For example,
the top 3 questions of VCs or founders?
Yeah, VCs.
Yeah, I'm kind of more interested in the top 3 questions of founders, to be honest.
Yeah,
because
but you're advising VCs.
Yeah, but the reason I say that is because you can't actually deliver a meaningful service as a VC. That's what I will advise them and do advise them, unless you're actually responding to what the founders need. So if the founders are coming to you and say, frankly, dude, I don't need your money. You don't do anything for me. I don't love you anymore. And frankly, you've always been rude to me, I'm going to go and do my own thing, then you deserve it, frankly. And frankly, that, to be very honest with you, a lot of the VC industry has behaved like that in the past, and it shows. So I don't work with those kind of people. But I do think that this idea, I mean, this is the point that Jeremy made earlier, that the idea that this space has completely disrupted the VC industry is correct in many ways, but there is also a maturing of that attitude, because you are also seeing projects that, for example, are themselves getting FOMO, and sometimes the good ones too, and saying, I need to do an ICO now and raise $80 million, and then I'm going to make a global business that is going to, I've got a network that is going to knock Uber out of the water. Actually, no, because what you need to do, if you're serious about being a founder and actually growing a business and really want to build a token that has some meaning and a utility and all the other good, shiny things, actually what you need to do is what every other startup business has ever had to do, which is actually work out your prototype, iterate it, test it, throw it against the wall, and that needs to be funded. And there's a kind of research stage which is kind of pre-seed and definitely doesn't need $80 million. So, you know, there is a value in these early stages of having someone serious come in and take the early risk and say, look, we're going to back this because we see the long-term thing. More than that, we're going to hold your hand and we're going to help you build it and or bring you our networks that will help you do that. And I think there is a market for that. So,
like pre-ICO funding.
Pre-ICO funding, but
your lawyers, your white paper development, your alpha problem.
Sometimes actually supporting on an operational side, you know, and more. I mean, there is a market for that. And for the founder that it doesn't suit, that's fine. Let them go and do an ICO if that's what works for them. I mean, that's fine. I think it is possible though to leverage good institutional investors who are aligned with your objectives and not just trying to squeeze your blood. And I think people honestly are starting to recognize that. And again, if it doesn't suit, it doesn't suit.
Yeah, and I think we're going to start to see staged token creation events.
Yes,
right?
and definitely continuous token.
Yeah, and you're going to see many of the techniques that have been applied to venture, I believe, entering the space, but in a much more decentralized way, right? And so, you know, more to follow on that space. We have some ideas about what we can do to create platforms to encourage that.
Lee, I was going to ask you, have you ever had clients or you know, people come up to you and say, hey, we're not sure, shall we raise VC funding or shall we do an ICO? Or
The short answer is no, but that's not a change in the new world or the old world, frankly. That's not really a question for the lawyers. We would talk about how we could structure it. Yeah. It's not really, no. So there we go. Short answer.
Great. Okay, I think there was someone here on the side before. I'm just trying to balance it out. Yes, in the white there. Yeah, the behind. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I can just since you are, of course, an expert in the industry, I want to ask to all of you guys. First, for example, if you need to make a smart investment decision, of course you know better, you have a deeper knowledge of the potential of the industry, but also the flaws or the risk, if any. If you heritage $1 million, how much of that money you will invest in cryptocurrencies? And the second question is, how do you want to split it, like, or the breakdown in Ethereum or Bitcoin? I would like to just know, including Lee that doesn't own any Bitcoin, I want to just get
I think anything in the Ethereum ecosystem, you have to ask, will it outperform the Ether token, right? And long term in our ecosystem, every project that's successful helps build Ethereum and helps build Ether demand. And so I think fundamentally, you know, the answer is 100% Ether.
I'm with you. I'm actually with you. Yeah.
So that's not a serious answer, and that's not financial advice. But it is a question that, you know, when we look at, you know, I think it's a serious question, right? Which of these projects are likely to outperform Ethereum as a platform?
Yep.
I have a question that's sort of a follow-up to that. Can you talk a little bit about permission and permissionless blockchains? And for those of us that have been around through technology cycles, we sort of have seen this story before, and maybe one just being a technological advancement and other being true distribution. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I was just thinking about your analogy. I mean, the permission blockchains versus not having permission. I think that topic, actually that definition, I think, is now beginning to be more sophisticated than it was when it first arrived. That's what I should say. It's like, because when we started looking at Bitcoin and started talking about underlying technology of Bitcoin, the blockchain, is the thing that excited us in financial services. Immediately we hit this wall of, all right, we cannot really be open public blockchains because we don't know who is on the network. And then that kind of started this whole permissioned or not conversation. I think now with this with techniques and where we are in the cycle of development of what's happening, we do have techniques to actually have permissioned and not permissioned blockchains that are actually available for broader audience. I think they're all in development, and I mean in the most simplest way. Maybe I'm actually wrong. Actually, I have to ask other people as well. Like at some point the whole permissioned blockchain stuff, or more the things that were closed, wasn't really that exciting. That was actually more of distributed databases and cryptographically secured, whatsoever. But I think it is changing. Now people are finding more creative ways of merging those two concepts.
Yeah.
Am I right? I mean, this is the way I'm seeing it, but you may have a different perspective.
Yeah, I mean, there's also frankly, there's a cultural thing too, which has been a kind of resistance to the idea of permission blockchains that is softening, maybe. So, but yeah.
But I mean, I guess it's other way around as well from a banks or corporates perspective, because I always looked at it as how would financial services adapt this, and then we came up with it needs to be permission.
Of course.
Yeah. And but that is also changing as well, softening from other perspectives. So it's like permission.
Well, it's changing because the big banks want to trade Ether and Bitcoin, so they have to figure out how to do it.
Yeah. Well.
Right. So, I mean, for me, there's a two-part answer to this. One, the ultimate version is having roles-based access control built into the protocols. Yeah. And the second answer is sort of a broader one, which says you can build a permission called a supply chain blockchain, right? Where suppliers are, getting real-time, cryptographically provable updates on where parts are moving around their supply chain. And then a series of banks can build a payments blockchain. Well, at some point, the probability is someone in the supply chain is going to want to pay someone else in the supply chain, and all of a sudden you're going to have to connect two blockchains. So I think very, very quickly we are not going to be talking about permission blockchains. I think the technology will be there with RBAC, and it'll be there, it'll be strongly encrypted, it'll be fine, and we're going to be talking about routed blockchains, right? And this goes back to the sharding point and the subdivision, right? Yeah, I think I don't think anyone in this room needs the explanation that the internet means internet-worked, right? That is the definition of internet. And I think we're going to see, and we said this, I said this even at the kickoff talk for the EEA launch, we're going to see routed blockchains. And routed blockchains also are going to address a lot of the interoperability issues too. And
it's a huge issue, yeah.
Well, I'm not convinced it's a huge issue, because I don't know anyone who's got two large-scale global blockchains in production where they need to switch data back and forth.
I think it the other way. It's an opportunity.
It's something that will become a huge issue, right? But I think routed blockchains are a solution to that. What's that? What?
Polka dot.
Well, maybe not polka dot. I don't know if we want to live in a Gavin encoded world or not.
The idea.
But the idea of these global interoperable routed networks, I think, we've seen it before. That's how you achieve scalability.
All right, we just have one more question. Unfortunately, then we have to go over. Yeah, okay.
Oh, this is actually the question. Okay, here it goes. All right, so zero-knowledge proofs have been around for a while, right? But ZK Snarks are relatively recent. This is a question for Jeremy, by the way. How confident do you feel about ZK Snarks? Would you?
So we implemented ZK Snark. We implemented zero-knowledge proofs with the Monetary Authority of Singapore for Project Udin. So we're pretty confident. We want them to be faster. I mean, 40 seconds is slow, right? Some of you may have seen the ING range proofs that were announced last Thursday at the EEA meetup in Amsterdam. So it's a technique, but there will be other privacy techniques are required too. Right.
Okay, I think there is one more, and then we are running out of time, unfortunately.
Okay, just coming back to the VC question, I'm an angel investor myself. So do you think you'll see tokenized VCs? So the VCs do provide some value.
There's already that sort of thing's already happening.
Okay.
I mean, look, the point is ultimately whether or not there is some value in the kinds of deep due diligence that sort of approach brings, and it may not be applicable for all cases, as I've said, but I think that there is a value to doing that. There's certainly a lot of innovation going on in that space too, including people that I work with and thinking how they can present an interesting offering that actually responds to the needs of the constituents they're trying to address, i.e. founders.
Yeah. Perhaps the more interesting question is, what would it mean to be a decentralized VC?
Come back to us with the answer in a year, okay?
Yeah, I mean, just generally, I might just make another point. You cannot decentralize all the things. I mean, you know, even each of these projects, which are live and die by decentralization, actually involves a group of humans, typically led by a human. You know, you do actually need people you need some analog stuff too, you know.
Awesome. For the sake of time, I think it would be actually really cool if to end this, you would all just, you know, optionally just share one tip for anyone who's interested in the space in terms of, you know, what can you do to be more knowledgeable, to learn more about it, to just get excited about the blockchain space, like for newbies and for people who's already interested, like what call to actions are there to take for anyone really interested in this space?
I mean, I will only say, maybe it's not exactly the same question, the right answer, but so when you're building a company these days and you're building your technology and so forth, I think that people really need to be thinking about how to use this paradigm, these tools, and really innovate around how, like, this tool set of blockchains, and I think there's a lot to do. I mean, I would start from business side of things and whatever you're trying to achieve, and then think about like what you are designing. I mean, in terms of you know, who should be on your platform? Is it going to be a platform or not? Do you want people to be building things on it, or do you want it to be closed? I mean, all those kind of things. You have so many things to have fun with, and I think I would just do that.
I would say take some money you don't mind losing, buy some Ether, and go buy some tokens. Not to try and make money, but to learn how the ecosystems are used. Once you've used the tokenized economy, you will not want to go back to the legacy fiat world. And you will be watching the future of finance and the future of the global economy from a front row seat.
Yeah, I think that's a good approach. I think most of us just do it. Most of us who've had this genesis, some later than others, in my case, most of us kind of didn't sleep for 3 months. Yeah. And so, you know, I think it's pretty universal experience. Just do that. Just don't sleep. Read everything, and you still will not be in the 100 or 200 people who can go right the way down the stack. That's okay, and that's really exciting. I really recommend that.
Lots of reading. Yeah. Lee, for you?
Lots of reading, and have an open mind in terms of, you know, if you're looking at a particular business or service, what actually is the core service, not how you do it, how it's been done, but what's the core service that you're providing. And if you keep that open mind, all sorts of kind of potential new ways of doing that will be open. And the technology, if you have some grasp like me, I'm kind of in awe in some of the detail here, you put the two together and some real exciting possibilities come out.
Fantastic. So, I mean, we're going to have drinks and snacks soon, so you'll still be able to catch the speakers to ask them some questions. But yeah, I just wanted to give a big round of applause to all of our speakers, and thank you so much for having come here. So now we have, as a next speaker, we have Jeremy, who's going to talk to us a little bit about...
Does anyone actually want to hear about ConsenSys, or does everyone just want to go have drinks? We can do a vote. Who wants to hear about ConsenSys? Oh, wow.
Wow, okay, that was
Jesus.
Good. Jesus Christ.
Sorry, this is being recorded. I shouldn't have said that.
There you go.
So, surprisingly, that is me. So, just by way of background, I've had the benefit of working across 3 big elements that apply to blockchain. I was on the Java team at Oracle, working on beta programs and early adoption programs and product design and building a sales force there to bring Java to the world. From about 20 years ago, I did that for a number of years. I was an investment banker at Goldman Sachs. So in the vampire squid era, according to Rolling Stones. And then before joining ConsenSys, I spent the last 5 years working with VCs on various different bits and pieces. So that sort of gave me a fairly unique position to enter the space when I did in 2015. So what I'm going to talk about today is just who is ConsenSys. ConsenSys, for those of you who don't know, was founded by Joseph Lubin, who's one of the co-founders of the Ethereum project and led the Ether token launch. Joe was very interested in making sure there was some Ethereum-based software available on the Ethereum mainnet when it went live in 2015. Now, this happened to coincide with articles like The Trust Machine in The Economist that said, the technology behind Bitcoin called blockchain is going to revolutionize finance. So ConsenSys started getting inundated with requests for help on blockchain projects, initially mostly by banks, and much more recently, though the company's only 3 years old, so much more recently is a relative term, but more recently by other blockchain companies and other startups. So we fundamentally believe that the global economy is 1, going digital, and 2, going decentralized, right? So we have gone from a platform economy with Facebook, this rather exceptional company, and various others building these vertically integrated stacks on the internet, right? And the internet itself was a big step forward because before the internet, if you wanted to get your software or information in the hands of consumers, you had to print disks, right? CD-ROMs, and before that, floppy disks. I started computing at the 5.5 inch or the 5.25 inch era, if anyone even vaguely recognizes that notion, right? So the internet was this huge revolution because all of a sudden we had all the information at our fingertips and we were able to distribute software for free, right? Then we got one step further and said, hold on, we can distribute more than software and information, right? We can distribute houses, we can distribute cars, and that was a big deal. And now what we're seeing is really what we should call a tokenized economy or a peer-to-peer economy where we don't need intermediaries to exchange value, right? And we sort of view this entire evolution into a transformation of increasingly reducing intermediation and increasingly enabling open platforms, right? And we're sort of in year 3 of an N-year journey about seeing this happen. But very significantly, this shift was happening with or without blockchain, right? This shift was happening with or without blockchain. The difference is in a decentralized marketplace, right? It is the market participants that govern and participate in the value creation. So it unlocks some very interesting models and some extremely rapid network effects, right? Ethereum as a protocol has gone from 0 to 37 billion of value in 3 years. That's fast. That is materially faster than Airbnb or Uber, right? Materially faster, right? So with these network-based models, we can get massive incentives for it to develop rapid network effects. And so who knows what that's really going to bring us, but we think it's a pretty interesting place to be. So of course, so we have a very broad vision and mission at ConsenSys. It's fundamentally built on developing the Ethereum blockchain and enabling it on a new class of frictionless global commerce with inclusion for all, and sometimes we say with abundance for all. Abundance used in the context of an exponential organization, right? An abundance of ideas and abundance of opportunities. And our mission is to build the tools needed to scale the emerging economic, social, and political operating system for the platform. So we look at this world of decentralization and this world of blockchain very broadly, right? We have projects working on universal basic income. We have projects working on global identity. We look at this technology and this decentralized movement very, very broadly. So this slide is 2 weeks out of date because I think the number today, so I saw 3 offer letters go out today, so I think we're up to 481 employees in 27 countries. And with offices in about a dozen or so and more of them increasing. We opened the London office, well, we celebrated the opening of the London office here on Monday. And we work with a really broad range of stakeholders. We work with global governments, we work with regulators, we work with blockchain startups, we work with investors, we work in the capital markets, we work in energy, we work across the spectrum from 2 people with an idea that want to build a new blockchain platform and want to come to ConsenSys to do that, to working with governments and large corporations and everything in between. And it's a very multivariate environment. We have strategy consultants, we have designers, we obviously have coders, but we have protocol engineers, front-end coders, a very, very mixture. Because one of the things that we've encountered is because we are sort of rewiring aspects of the global economy, it takes a very diverse set of people to come together to do that, right? So we have very broad domains. About half the company is engineers, and we have this ongoing challenge to keep up the engineering density, but about half the company is a very multivariate and mixed environment. So we operate, my friend Manu describes this as the 5+2 model, or the 5+1 model. So we operate, a lot of our work and a lot of what we're known for is at the infrastructure level. Our Infura infrastructure now is averaging 1.7 billion requests a day on the public mainnet. Our truffle development tool has been downloaded about 200,000 times and is sort of the predominant used framework for developing in Ethereum. We have a .NET implementation. We have a protocol engineering group, which Ben is a member of and can talk about. We have had developers go back and forth between the foundation and ConsenSys. So Carl just went back to just left ConsenSys to go to the foundation to work on Casper. Piper Merriam is still using Python developers who work at ConsenSys to build PyEVM for the foundation, et cetera. So we do a lot of work at the infrastructure and protocol layer. ConsenSys isn't just trying to build isn't just trying to build new types of applications. It's trying to build a new company. We run a decentralized organization with no formal hierarchy. We manage our projects as through what we call a venture production studio. So we look a bit like BetaWorks on the inside. If you want to start a project at ConsenSys, you come up with an idea, you recruit a couple of your friends, you get a sort of a prototype and a slide deck, and then you request something called a RAC, which is a resource allocation circle, which is a dynamically assembled group of your peers who evaluate your project and give you feedback and determine how much money we should spend on it. You then are given a business plan and told to come back in N number of months with something that, hopefully we can, facetiously I was going to say hopefully we can token launch, but hopefully we can build into a big, mature, powerful product. So we've done this about 35 or 40 times now. We are currently doing, about 2 racks a week on new projects, I guess. So we have this sort of scalable, exponential type organization because anyone with a good idea can potentially recruit resources and achieve funding in order to scale it out. There is a shortage of blockchain engineers, so we started fixing that one developer at a time with the introduction of ConsenSys Academy. We had about 1,300 developers apply from 90 countries around the world, which speaks to the global nature of this ecosystem, who went through a 10-week online coding academy. Josh was one of them and can tell you about it. We're now looking at how to decentralize the delivery of the academy. I think we'll be able to train between 2,000 and 5,000 blockchain developers next year. And we have a model which we think will enable us to continue to offer this program for free to the ecosystem. So beyond the academy, we have ConsenSys Enterprise, which is our engagement model, which is teams of consultants and product groups that go into companies and develop platforms for companies and develop strategies for countries, regulators, et cetera. And then finally, we have ConsenSys Capital, which includes our $50 million venture arm. So while the Ethereum ecosystem may be disrupting VC, we do have an early stage venture capital fund. Token Foundry, which is our ability to provide token design and launch services for other projects, and ConsenSys Capital Asset Management, which is our service for traditional legacy fiat investors to enter into the space, along with our Trustology platform, which is being led by Alex Batlin, who recently left BNY New York, Bank of New York to join us, which is building a trust layer, an institutional trust layer and custody services for crypto assets. And then the other aspect of what we do, in addition to these 5 areas, is we are deeply involved in the ecosystem. Obviously, the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance is near and dear to my heart, but also Blockchain for Social Impact and the Accounting Blockchain Coalition. So an example of an accounting problem in blockchain is when you sell a token, is it revenue or capital, right? Well, on the one hand, most issuers of tokens, I am told, don't want them to be securities. On the other hand, most of them don't want to pay tax and recognize revenue on the proceeds. How should you account for that? A conundrum for the accounting blockchain coalition. One of several issues that are going to emerge in the space. So a new type of company for a new economic paradigm, and it's pretty interesting. So that's us. I guess there's now drinks, and yes, We missed the hashtag we are hiring, but feel free to speak with any of the ConsenSys members if you have questions or interest in our company.